Okay, 95A. So we know that the bread remained on the table, and like many things that are inside and holy, if they get removed, they become invalid. So the question is, when the Jews were traveling in the desert, so there was no, well, we'll see, but simply understood, there was no, inner camps and outer camps, but the bread still remained on the table. So the question is, on the one hand, it's on the table. Does it maintain its sanctity? On the other hand, it's been removed from the inner holy areas that it had when the tabernacle was up. So every time they took down the tabernacle and traveled, the question is, what is the status of the lechem hapanim, of the bread? Maybe we'll back up a little bit at 95A. Ibailuhus, I'm going to 6-7 lines down. Just a quick review. Lechem hapanim nifsal b'masos or inner nifsal b'masos. When they travel, does it become invalid or not become invalid? Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, chadamar nifsal v'chadamar inner nifsal. Two opinions. One said it becomes invalid, and one said that it's not invalid. Mandamar nifsal, the one that said that's invalid, Rabbi Yeshua, how does he know? Because the Torah juxtaposes their settling and they're traveling. They're resting and they're traveling. Kasher yachanu ken yiso. Just like they rested, they traveled. What's the comparison between resting and traveling? So one, you're catching your breath, and one, you're not. So what's the comparison? Ma b'chaniyaso, just like when they're resting. Like we said in Israel, a chaniya is a parking lot. Yeah, you rest your car. So just like when they rested, nifsal, because the bread could become invalid if you removed it from its area. Nifsal biyotze, af b'nisyaso, nifsal biyotze. So too, when they traveled, it'll also become invalid, since right now there is no inner or outer sanctified areas. Mandamar enu nifsal, the one who said it's not nifsal, he says that it's not invalid. How does he know? The verse tells you that the bread will always be, it'll be on it, meaning as long as the bread is on the table, and it traveled like that, it traveled with the bread on the table, even though there is no inner and outer right now sanctified areas, it will remain in its sanctity. Okay, but what does he do with the other one's verse that says, that compares resting to traveling? Sounds like it was invalid. So he says, compare it the other way. Just like when it rested. If it didn't leave its place, it stayed on the table, which also happened to be in the inner circle, which is holy, the inner area, which is holy. So therefore, lo mifsal, it won't be invalid. So too when it travels, as long as it stays on its place on the table, lo mifsal. Sounds like everyone will agree if it gets removed off the table when it's traveling, it's going to be invalid. And when the tabernacle is up and it's inside on the table, it's holy. The question is, on the table when tabernacle is down while traveling. It says it should be on it. Sounds like it should be holy even when it's traveling. So that question forces us to retract. Ella, new answer. Ki asa Rav Dimi Amar. Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel and said the following: Bib misudar the kuli alma lo pligi. So when the bread was on the table, everyone agrees that it is holy. Sounds like even while traveling. Ella ki pligi. Where is this machlokas? Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yochanan. The mesulak. So every week they would have to change it. So now, when you remove the bread off the table, and then they started traveling, so it's off the table. They started traveling. They had so that's where they're going to argue. Mand Amar Nifsal, the one who holds it's invalid, the Ksiv Kashiyach Ken Yiso, compares resting to traveling. Just like when you're traveling, if you remove it from its location, it's going to be invalid. So too, when you're resting, so too when you're traveling, now there is no location, even though, and we'll see more of this at the bottom, you're surrounded by, right, the 12 tribes are divided up into 4 groups, and they're traveling like the circular formation. So, and in the middle is the tabernacle, and true, I don't know if it's in the middle, but they still have this circular formation that they're traveling in. So But even with all that, once you're traveling, there's no tabernacle. It's taken down. Therefore, there's no inner or outer. Everything's outer, and therefore it's going to be invalid. Lemandam eino nifsal. So now the bread has been removed off the table, and yet it's not invalid. How could that be? Dichsiv, it says v'nasa ohel moed. Sounds like the ohel moed is traveling. Now the ohel moed is a way to refer to the sanctified area, the tent of meeting. So what does it mean? It is traveling. It's not necessarily like a physical thing. It's more of a spiritual thing. So what does it mean? It means afal pisha nasa, even though they're traveling, ohel moedu. So this opinion holds that the reason why it's not invalid is because actually while traveling, even though the tabernacle was disassembled, it would still have a sanctity of the ohel moed. Therefore, the bread never left the ohel moed. So right now, the two opinions are, when they're traveling, is there a status ohel moed or not? If not, so then the whole area is mundane. If it's mundane, the bread's invalid. If it's sanctified, so the bread never left the sanctified area, so therefore it's going to be holy. Okay. The other opinion, Nami Haksiv Kasher Yaakov, can you sew? It juxtaposes resting to traveling. Le'idach Kisa. So prove it for his way. Just like when you're resting, if you don't remove it from its locale, then it's not going to be invalid. So too when you're traveling, as long as you keep it where it is and you don't remove it, so then it's also not going to be invalid. The other opinion, Idach Nami Haksiv V'nasa Ohel Moed. It says that the ohel moed traveled. What does that mean? So hahu lidigalim huda asa. So this was not telling you about the sanctity. Rather, it was just there for the digalim. The digalim were the formations. So it was just telling you how to travel and which formation do you go. Which literally degel is a flag, but here it means because each three tribes had their own flag, so it was, and then they were in a formation. So it's just telling you, V'nasa ohel moed means, it doesn't mean the tent of meeting. Its sanctity was there as they traveled. Rather, it means it told you which one should go first, which one should go second, which one should go third, but doesn't tell you that they had any sanctity. Okay. Now the other opinion: how does he know which way the Golim, the different tribes traveled? Mimachane halavim besoch hamachanos nafka. He learns it out from the fact that the Torah tells us, "V'nasa ohel moed machane halavim besoch hamachanos kasher yachanu ken yiso." So the machane levia was within the other camps. The Levite camp was within the other camps. And how does that tell you exactly which way to travel? So I mean, the Levite was and what therefore it always had to be there. So it's had to travel to make sure that it's in the middle. This ohel moed, which is where the Levites were, had to be always in the middle. So they point out it's between Degel Reuben and Degel Ephraim. Between Reuben and Ephraim, you would have the Machane Levia. So you have to always travel in a way that they're going to be in the middle. Okay. Now, so right now we're saying that there's two opinions. If while they're traveling, that area in the formations in the middle of the formations, does that retain the status of an ohel moed, a tent of meeting, and therefore it's holy, and therefore the bread is going to be valid or not? So now, meisvei b'shas siluk masos, when they would be traveling. So siluk here means really to remove. What would they remove? They would remove the curtain. So that curtain that separated the unholy from the holy, when the tabernacle was up, they would roll it up. So what would happen? The shasi like masos kachim nifsalin biyotze, the kachim, the holy food. What would happen? It would automatically become invalid biyotze, because now there's no more inner area. There's no more sanctified area. V'zavin umitzurayin mishtalchen chutz lemechitzasim. And now a zav, end of last week's parsha, and a mitzora, the whole last week's parsha. So except for the end. So zavin, the certain emissions that make you impure, or mitzora, so you get tsaras. So they would get sent outside of the camps. So now, so 1 second. Yeah, so basically, even though they would roll up the curtain, the sanctified offerings still, it would still remain in sanctity, meaning the camp would still remain in sanctity, and therefore, since it would retain its sanctity, so therefore anything removed from that area would become invalid, and because it retains its sanctity, you would send the zav and the mitzora outside the camps. Right? If it doesn't have any sanctity, so then there's no difference between this area and 50 feet over. But if it does retain its sanctity, so then they're going to be sent outside. So it says the Gemara, "Mai lav afilu lechem upon him." Once you're telling me that the other sacrificial foods are going to become invalid if they're removed outside that area, even though the curtain was rolled up. So then shouldn't that also include the lechem upon him? And if that would include the lechem upon him, so then that would be a attack and a support for these two opinions. The one that says that it retains his holiness has an explicit brisa on his side. The other opinion says, lo, bar milechem upon him. All sanctified foods are going to become invalid if you remove it, except for the lechem upon him. Says Gemara, how does that make any sense? Manav shach. I ohel moed dafkahu afilu kachim nami. Make up your mind. If this is a ohel moed, even though the paroches was rolled up, the curtain was rolled up, so then sorry. So the Brisa mentioned the first one, we thought that even though it's rolled up, right now the sacrificial foods become invalid, and the mitzvah gets sent out. Now the Gemara says, how do you make that split? The reason why the sacrificial foods become invalid right now is because there's no curtain. So right now, it's not a sanctified area. But if it's not a sanctified area, then why do you send the mitzvah out outside the camp? There's no camp. So that's what we're asking now. We're asking that manav shach. Either way you go. I ohel moed dafkahu. If it's considered an ohel moed, even though the parochas, the curtain was rolled up, so then why should any sanctified food that's right now in this area become invalid? It's still holy. And if you're telling me it's not really an ohel moed, so then even the bread should become invalid. So how do you split? Other foods become invalid, but the bread's not invalid? Yeah. So ohel moed lav dafkahu, and if it's lav dafka, actually it has a sanctity of the ohel moed, so then even the bread should become invalid. Oh, so that's now, we have to retract, erase, start again. Elo kiyasa Ravin. When Ravin came from Israel, he said like this. Amar ma, kiyasa Ravin amar, mar amar b'mesuder, umar amar b'mesulak. Ravin explained that really the ohel moed is not, when it says ohel moed, it's a lav dafka. It doesn't mean it retains its sanctity. It's just there to teach you that they have to travel in a certain way, in a certain formation. And the one that says that it's the lechem upon him, the bread is going to be valid, that's talking about when it's on the table. Even when it's traveling, it'll be holy. The one that says that it's invalid is talking about when the bread was removed from the table and then they started traveling. So according to Ravin, there's no two opinions. It just depends where the bread is. If it's on the table, even when they're traveling, it's going to be valid because it's going to be kosher. Because the pasuk says, "V'lechem hatamid alaftiya." It should be on. It'll always be there, meaning it'll always retain its sanctity even while traveling. The other opinion that said that's invalid is talking about when they went to switch on a weekly basis. They switched the bread. As they're switching it, it's off the table, and then they started traveling. So it's off the table, and they're traveling. That he'll agree that it's going to be invalid. Velo pligi, and they don't disagree. Okay. Amar Abaye says, Shma mina I learned from here that yesh siluk masaos balayla. Abai says that I learned from here that you can disassemble the tabernacle at night, meaning it all went by the cloud. So if the cloud went up at nighttime, so then right away they had to travel, disassemble, and they would not wait until the morning. So how does he know that? Let's say there's no disassembling the tabernacle and traveling at nighttime. So then, Amos Madli Litzafra. So then, when would they roll up the curtain? So they would only roll it up in the morning. From the morning, they couldn't roll it up. Should be really mitzafra, not litzafra. They only roll it up from the morning, not at nighttime. Why? Because once again, Abai says it must be that they roll up the curtain at nighttime, because if they didn't, so then what's going to happen? You would only be able to roll it up in the morning and not at nighttime. And if they only roll it up in the morning, so then we have a question. Why are you so worried about the bread being invalid for leaving its locale? The bigger problem was left overnight. You only can roll up the parochas in the morning and not at nighttime. So what'd you do with the bread? The bread, you left it there overnight, and therefore it's going to be invalid. Says the Gemara, Pshita. It says, Laleches yomam v'layla. What do you mean? Obviously, it's an explicit verse. They traveled at the daytime and at nighttime. When they traveled, they rolled up the curtain and they went. So what's the novelty that Abai is teaching me that he sees from this brisa? They must have traveled. They must have traveled also at nighttime. So says the Gemara, no. The only time you travel at nighttime when you already disassembled everything in the daytime, you can keep traveling at nighttime. But if you never rolled up the curtain in the morning, so then you would not be able to travel. You would not be able to roll it up at the nighttime. So only time you'd roll it up would be when you rolled up in the morning. So then the nighttime would follow. But if you didn't do that, so then you would not uproot it at nighttime. Tamash Malon teaches us Abaye that it must be that even at nighttime they rolled up the parochas, disassembled, and traveled. Because if they couldn't do that and they had to wait till the morning, then there's another problem here. Not just is the bread leaving its area invalid, there's a problem of lina. You can't leave it overnight. So this way,
I'm not sure if that makes sense because the bread was there overnight anyway.
Right. I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking the bread was there anyways overnight, but I think that that's the point. Meaning, according to the opinion that says it's invalid. Oh, one second. No. Half a thought, not a full thought. One sec. Here. You have a footnote on it, or
I'm just looking at the.
no? Here. Yeah. No. Meaning, forget the bread. Not the bread. The Bryce is talking about the cut. The Bryce says, "B'shas siluk masos kachim nisalim." When they would remove the curtain, so then the kachim would be invalid. So forget the bread for a second. Other sacrifices that were offered in the daytime, at nighttime when they would remove the curtain, then those offerings would be invalid. Says Abaye, I see from here they must have rolled up the curtain at nighttime. Why? Because these are sacrifices. Let's say they were sacrificed during the daytime, but now it's nighttime. So if you can't roll up the parochas and disassemble at nighttime and only in the morning, so why does the Brisa say that these sacrifices, when you roll up the parochas, are invalid because they now left their holy area? If you can only roll it up in the morning and not at nighttime, they would now be left overnight. You're right, not the bread. The bread's always a special exception because the bread's left for a week. And so there's no restriction on it being overnight. The whole thing was overnight. So, but in this brisa that we brought as a question, it says the sacrifice that were offered in the daytime. At nighttime, Abaye says it must be they rolled up the curtain at nighttime. Because if they were not allowed to, because why? Because the pasuk says, oh, maybe you would have thought the pasuk said only in the daytime, when you're uprooting, can it remain that way at nighttime, but you can't initiate at nighttime. If that would be true, then the only time you would be able to initiate a rolling up the curtain would be the next day. But what happened to all the sacrifices that were offered, Sunday morning 10 a.m. and now the curtain was rolled up Monday morning 10 a.m. So right now those sacrifices should be invalid for another reason. They're left overnight. The fact that the brisa says they're only invalid because they were outside their holy area shows you that they must have been able to roll up the curtain at nighttime. And now, once they rolled up the curtain, well, the only problem is going to be, well, if there's no curtain, there's no holy and unholy. It's all unholy. If it's unholy, then they're going to be invalid. Good. So, Kamashwan. Good. Now, Viramini, the brisa says, Huglu parochas. Once they rolled up the parochas, the curtain, which separated the holy from the unholy area, Hutru hazavin umitzarayin likanes lisham. Now the zavin and the mitzarayim, which were usually sent out of the camps, were allowed to now come back in because once again there is no holy unholy. It's all unholy. So what do you see from there? You see from the fact that when they removed the parochas, now the area is not holy anymore. So that would be against one of the opinions that said that it'll remain holy.
That's also because the people, as they march, as they move, they have to join people from the back would cross the area where the.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if they were traveling when they had the Mitzorah. According to the opinion that says it remains sanctified, even though the parochas was rolled up, according to that opinion, they'd have to travel like way in the back. I don't know, not in that formation area.
On the outside. On
the outsides, yeah. Like the ones that Amalek got, I don't know. the tail ends of So once it rolled up, no more sanctity. Amar Rashi lo kasha. That's not a difficulty. It depends. Ha Rabbi Eliezer and Ha Rabbanan. Okay, so one is Rabbi Eliezer, one's Rabbanan. So now, how do we get to this? The Tanya, we go to Pesachim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yachol dachaku zavan mitzrayim v'nichtas lazar Pesach hababatuma. In a case where the congregation is impure and you have to bring, now you're able to bring the Pesach sacrifice in a state of impurity. So now you would have thought that if the Zavin and the Mitzorayim would come in to the courtyard on Pesach that's brought in a state of impurity, you'd have thought that they'd be liable. And you'd think they'd be like, Talmud Lomar. No. Juxtaposed to B'chol Tamei L'Nefesh. What's the juxtaposition? B'shah Shetmei Mesim Mishtalchin, Zavin and Mitzorayim Mishtalchin. When the Zavin and the Mitzorayim are sent out, people that are impure from touching a corpse are also sent out. Ain't Tmei Mesim Mishtalchin, if the ones that are impure are not sent out, so Ein Zavin and Mitzorayim Mishtalchin. So the Zavin and the Mitzorah follow whatever happens by the people that are impure from touching a corpse. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, once they rolled up the paroches, there's no more courtyard, no more sanctified area. So therefore, the impure can come, or not come. They won't be sent out because there's no camps because they rolled up the paroches. So therefore, they're allowed to be there. So if they're allowed to be there, so too the Zav and Mitzorah are also allowed to be there. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, you see that when they roll up the parochas, that there's no more sanctity. So impure from touching a corpse, people could remain there. They only can't go into a sanctified area, but this is not sanctified. And the Zavin and Mitzrayim can come back. And either they can come back or they won't be sent out. Depending where they are, they can come back into the camp. So what do you see? Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says that once it's rolled up, it has no sanctity anymore, that area. And the Rabbanan said that even though the Tmei Mesim, they won't be sent out. However, the Zavan and the Mitzrayim will be sent out. They still would be sent out because there's still a level of sanctity. Now, if there's a level of sanctity, so why could the people that have touched the corpse remain? Why could they remain? Because the Torah has a special dispensation that someone who's impure by touching a corpse can bring this Pesach, can bring this Paschal offering. But it doesn't say that by a Ziv or Tzaras. Rabbi Eliezer compares the two. But the Chavim say, no, only what it says. It says Tamei Meis. Tamei Meis was someone who's able to bring the Paschal sacrifice even when in a state of impurity, but it's not coming to include other impurities such as a Zav or a Mitzorah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they bring that Moshe Rabbeinu. He took the bones of Yosef with him into that area. Because the only Tamei Meis, but not other things. Yeah. Okay, fine. Either way. So at the end of the day, after all the dust settles, so there's a debate, if there's a debate, about the lechem upon him. But simply understood, we end up that really that was Rav and said that there is no debate. Depends if it was on the table or off the table. That's that. And before that, so before that, we thought there was a debate if there's sanctity or not. That was one debate, and according to Ravin, it's a separate debate that no one argues. There is no debate. It depends. Was the bread on the table? If yeah, then it's good, even if the barokas got rolled up. But the other opinion would hold, not the other opinion. Everyone agrees that when it's on the table, even when they're traveling, it's going to be good. And everyone agrees that if it's off the table and they're traveling, it's not going to be good. And then we ended off that according to there seems to be two opinions. In general, when they rolled up the parochas, did that area remain holy or not? And those two opinions reflect, Rabbi Eliezer says that it's not holy, and the Rabbanan that say that it is holy. Okay. Now, it says the Mishnah, so the bread, both on Shavuos and the weekly bread, they would knead it and set it up outside the holy area. But they would bake it inside. The Einon Dochos es Shabbos, but this would not, the baking would not be something that could push away Shabbos. You would have to bake it only on Friday. Now, the question is going to be, is that if you tell me that everything was done outside in a non-holy area, so the vessels they used weren't holy, so it could remain overnight. If the baking was done inside a holy area, it sounds like the oven, which is holy, would sanctify the bread. So then we wonder, that has to be done on Friday. If it's left overnight, so then it's going to be invalid. That's going to be the question. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol ma'aseim b'fnim. Everything's done inside. Rabbi Shimon Omer, the exact opposite. La'olam haviragel lomar. He was used to saying, Shtei alechem alechem apanim, kisheres bazar, v'ksheres beis hapagim. Not only could you do everything in the courtyard, you could do everything in all of Yerushalayim. So three opinions. Do you split kneading and setting up outside, baking inside, everything inside, or everything outside? Says the Gemara, Hagufa Kasha. This is a problem. It's an internal problem. You tell me the kneading and the setting up is done outside, so what do I see? Dry things like dough do not become sanctified in their vessels. But then you told me, then you told me that the dry things, like the dough that gets baked inside, is done inside, which tells me Alma midas yavish is niskachu. So it is sanctified. The difference is if it's not sanctified, you could remove it and it's fine. If it is sanctified and you remove it and it's not fine. So which one is it? So make up your mind. Is the flour going to become sanctified? And then if it's removed, it's going to be invalid. Or is the dry things like dough not sanctified in a vessel? So now, Amar Rabba, Hakasha, this difficulty, Adam Kasha, only a strong person, Shu Kasha Kebarzel, which is strong like iron, would ask that question. Or be able to, so who asked that? Who's that strong person like iron? Umanu Rav Sheshas. That must be Rav Sheshas. Says the Gemara, I don't understand this whole problem. My Kasha, Dilmi Isar and Lo Mekadesh and Taner Mekadesh. Very simple. The flour, which is dry, does not become sanctified. The dough, which is also dry, does become sanctified. Who said all has to be the same? Says the Gemara, okay, you're right. El Kasha, this must be the difficulty. El Kasha ha Kasha. The baking's done inside. Alma, so the tanner, the oven is inside, which means that it's holy, which means whatever puts inside of it is going to be holy. If it sanctifies it, tanner mekadesh, if it ain't dokas, it's a Shabbos. So it sanctifies it, but it doesn't push away the Shabbos. So you have to do it on Friday. But if you have to do it on Friday, if slabulina, then it's going to be left overnight and it's sanctified. So therefore, it'll become invalid. And that can't be because we need it for Shabbos. So that we say, Amarava, Hakasha, difficult question. Adam Kasha, Shu Kasha Kabarzel. It can only be asked by someone who's strong as iron. Umanu, Rav Sheshas. Who's that? Rav Sheshas. Okay, that's the question. Amar Rav Ashi, what's the question? My Kusha. Dilma, when it says inside, it doesn't mean inside. Ma'im bifnim b'makom zrizin, in a place of literally alacrity, but really a place of cautiousness. Meaning, it's a place where the Kohanim are. So it's not the inner part of the base of Mikdash that's really sanctified. It's the outer part where the Kohanim are, and that's where you're going to bake it. So says the Gemara that this is a mistake. The Hadar Rav Ashi Brusahi. This is the error. Why? Manavshach. I don't understand. You want the baking to be not in a sanctified area, but in a place only with Kohanim. Why? Because they'll be very careful. And the kneading and the setting up is not done in that area. What's the difference? Why is this more careful than that? If you want the baking to be in an area where the Kohanim are doing it, so then shouldn't you be as strict about the kneading and the setting up? So it could be outside the courtyard, but only done by Kohanim. Okay, so and the kneading can be done by non-Kohanim. What's the difference? They all should require extra cautiousness and being more meticulous. So now what do you want to tell me? The kneading and the setting up does not require any being so meticulous. So then the baking, well, you put into an oven, take it out. How hard could that be? That also doesn't require being very meticulous. So Rav Ashi's split doesn't make sense. Rav Ashi Brusi, yeah, Rav Ashi is an error. And therefore the question is, since the tanner sanctified it, it should have a problem of lina being left overnight and being invalid. But at the same time, you can't bake it on Shabbos. So whatever that answer is a difficult question asked by a difficult person who's strong as iron. And that is that. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol Ma'aseh B'finim. Everything is done on the inside. Rabbi Yehuda, everything's done on the inside, nothing done on the outside. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, everything's done on the outside. So what's this debate, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon? So their debate at first is going to revolve around David Melech running for his life, ending up in the city of Nova Kohanim, and they're going to make him bread. And the response of David to the one making the bread is going to be a debate. And how you learn that response will get you the two opinions in our Mishnah at first glance. So, they're both interpreting one verse. It says, David Melech told back to the Kohen, he says, Vehu derech chol, va'af ki hayom yikdash bekeli. So it sounds like this is a matter of it's mundane, even though today it was sanctified in a vessel. So what does that mean? How do you understand this verse? Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Rabbi Yehuda understands that that b'chol eshkachenu dika'afulei, that David and Melech saw them on Erev Shabbos baking the bread. And Amar Lahu, and he told them, Derech Chol Ka'afisule, are you baking the bread on a weekday?
In a way of non-sacredness.
Meaning on a weekday, on Erev Shabbos.
Yeah.
In a way of, okay, good, thank you. In a way of non-sacredness. So, Avki Hayom Yikadish Bekeli. If Soleil Belina. So, if you would bake it today in the tanner on a Friday, what's going to happen? It's going to be invalid. It's going to be invalid for tomorrow. So what do you see? You see that the oven is able to sanctify the bread, and therefore you can't do it on Friday. So you have to do it on Shabbos, and that would be Rabbi Yehuda. That everything was done inside, meaning the oven, particularly, it was something which sanctifies the bread. If it sanctifies the bread, it has to be done on Shabbos, because if it's done on Friday, it's going to be invalid by the time Shabbos comes. And that's, so David, according to Rabbi Yehuda, was saying, well, Friday can't be. The oven sanctifies it, therefore you have to do it on Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon Savar b'Shabbos Ashkechenu. He found them on Shabbos. The ka'afule, they were baking the bread on Shabbos. Amar Lahu, he told them, Lo derechol be'isul lemavde. Don't you have to be doing this in a non-mundane, in a non-sacred way? You should not be doing this on Shabbos. Midei taner mekadesh. You think the oven sanctifies it? No, it's the table. Shulchan the mekadesh. And since the oven doesn't sanctify it, then you have no permission to be baking the bread on Shabbos, and therefore you should bake it Erev Shabbos. So this response of David, when they're giving him the bread, when he's watching what's happening, would be reflect. Rabbi Yehuda says everything's done inside, even the tanner, even the baking. If the baking is done inside, it means it's going to sanctify the bread. If it sanctifies the bread, it means that you have to do it on Shabbos. If you do it on Friday, it's going to be a problem of lina, leaving it overnight. Rabbi Shimon holds everything is done outside because the oven does not sanctify the bread. Since it does not sanctify the bread, so then you do it on Friday, there's no problem of lina, and therefore it's not going to push away Shabbos. Now, can you really say that David Melech found them while they were baking? The Haksiv, it says, the next verse, Vayiten lo hakohen kodesh. Ki lo haya sham lechem, ki im lechem upon him. That the Kohen gave him sanctified food. Ki lo haya sham lechem. There's no other bread. Ki im lechem upon him. Hamusarim milifnei Hashem. All there was holy bread that was placed before Hashem. So it sounds like the bread was already baked on a table, or was baked already, sitting there before Hashem. So on the table in the Mishkan. So there was no. So how could you tell me David Melech saw them while they were baking the bread? It sounds from the next verse it was already ready and they gave it to him. So Elamai derechol de ka'amar lahu. So Elamai derech de ka'amar lahu. What was that response that David Melech said? That it sounds like he's talking about mundane. It wasn't holy, which we thought meant those two ways he responded earlier. But now, according to the next verse, that pretty clearly states that it was already made. How do you interpret the previous verse? So Haki Ka'amrle. Leika lechem ki lechem upon Hashem. They told him all we have is the bread that's in front of us. That's holy. Meaning he wanted sacred, mundane bread, but they said all we have is holy bread. So he was requesting, he's not a Kohen, so he was requesting mundane bread. He can't eat lechem upon him. They said all we have is lechem upon him. So Amar Lahu lo mi bayi hai. He says, lo mi bayi hai dekev nenafik lema meila derech cholhu. He said, since you removed it from the table, so now it's once it's ready to eat for the Kohanim, permitted to the Kohanim to eat, so now it's removed from a status of meila. Once you remove it from the table, it's now mutar the Kohanim. And as long as there's a point of permission, of allowance to Kohanim, it now belongs to the Kohanim and not to Hashem, so to speak. And therefore, ein bo meila. And therefore, there's no meila. Now, Rashi points out it's even if it wasn't necessarily removed technically, but since right now it's able to be taken off and given to the Kohanim, he could still have it. Ella afilu heyach nami dehayom yikadosh b'kli havuli deleichel. Even today, sorry. And even if it was never removed off the table, and really it's only and really it's still sanctified, I still could eat it. Even though it's sanctified, and there might be ma'ila, but at the end of the day, next page, I'm a mesukanu. I'm life and death. I'm starving. I'm running for my life, and Rashi points out he had a certain he was sick with something called bulmus, a certain disease, and somebody that gets struck with bulmus, you're allowed to feed him even on Yom Kippur because it's life and death. So Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, what do they argue about? The Gemara pligi. They argue about the tradition that one had a tradition that was all done inside Rabbi Yehuda, and one had a tradition that was all done outside, and that's Rabbi Shimon. And now even our Mishnah really sounds like this in the words. Dekanami dekatani Rabbi Shimon Omer La'olam Havi Ragil Omer Shtei Alechem. Rabbi Shimon was La'olam Havi Ragil Omer. He was always used to saying, meaning that was the tradition. It sounds like he had a tradition. He was always used to saying, Shtei Alechem Alechem Apanim Ksheres Ba'azaruk Ksheres Abeis Pagi Shma Mina. Even the Mishnah that says, it doesn't sound like from the Mishnah that they're really arguing about like how to interpret the pasuk. It says La'olam Havi Ragil. He would always be used to saying. Sounds like that was the tradition that he had, in his mouth. It was on the tip of his tongue, and he would say this. So at the end of the day, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon argue about the tradition that they received. Do you do everything inside, or do you do everything outside? You're asking good questions. Sure. Gary 18.